bullshit!
Schaefer, Spence's best pound-for-pound fighter. He beat Garcia with skill. Schaefer believed Garcia would be the more skilled fighter, with Spence holding the edge with size and power. But instead, it was Spence who dominated with his skill. He didn't win that fight with size or power. He won that fight with skills. And we all thought if it came down to skills, Mikey Garcia would be the one to win the fight based on skills. But based on skills, Errol Spence won the fight, and it was absolutely beautiful to watch. You thought that was beautiful. Okay, whatever. Errol Spence won that fight. It was actually beautiful to watch. His combinations and his display of skills, I've hardly seen anything like it, Schaefer said. Based on what we witnessed, Schaefer now views Spence as the best pound-for-pound fighter in the sport.
Fuck out of here.
The new pound-for-pound king is right here. The best fighter in the world comes from Dallas. Errol Spence is in a perfect weight class. He's in the deepest weight class. There are so many great fights that can be done at welterweight. Yeah, we've been hearing that shit for years now. There are so many great fights, such a long list, and Errol Spence is not afraid to challenge any of them. The question is, are the opponents afraid to challenge Errol Spence? He had difficulty finding an opponent going into this fight. Mikey Garcia had the balls to stand up and say, hey, I'm going to challenge you. And I think with his performance tonight, Errol Spence didn't make it easier on himself to find opponents.
You sure?
Actually, I think he did. I think that anybody with a functioning brain saw a very big welterweight throw over 1,000 punches at a guy who'd never fought in his weight class, was significantly smaller than Spence was. They saw him throw 1,000 punches at what was a very chubby lightweight, and he couldn't even make the guy take a knee. Couldn't even score a knockdown.
I'm lying.
So I think that while Richard Schaefer might be elated at the bigger man beating the much smaller man, while he might be elated over that, the rest of us don't have blinders on. The rest of us see it for what it is. Errol Spence did not meet and exceed his reputation. Rather, he underperformed. It's not a mystery that Errol Spence himself said that he aimed to knock Mikey Garcia out. It's not a mystery that he said there's a high probability of that happening. He said, look at his knockout percentage, and we did. And those of us that tried to predict the fight predicted an Errol Spence KO. I mean, I know that's what I predicted, and I'll leave the link to that video in the description box. But the only reason I'm addressing this thick, very thick, line of bullshit from Richard Schaefer is so that we can address the intricacies of the fight. Was it size that beat Mikey Garcia, or skill that beat Mikey Garcia? Let's talk about it. You know, I think
It's two things.
that if you're going to assess that performance and just what exactly was it that hindered a Mikey Garcia victory, it wasn't any one thing. It wasn't just size, though size definitely played a role, a big role, but it wasn't just size, it was a combination of both, size and skill. You see, there are guys out there who have the size. There are guys out there who go into a fight and they have a height advantage over another fighter. And at times, they don't really use that height to their advantage because they don't have the skill to do so. So they end up giving that height to a smaller fighter, and the smaller fighter can at times capitalize off of that. That indicates that while they may have a physical advantage, they don't have the skill to use it properly. Now, I will say that to some degree, skill is a part of the reason that Errol was able to beat Mikey Garcia. It's a part of the reason, but it's not the only part, and it's not the only reason. And you can't discount, you can't dismiss that Errol was the bigger guy in the ring.
I'm lying.
And because he's the bigger guy in the ring, it makes him that much harder for Mikey to have to work around. Because this is a bigger guy with some skill of his own. But lest we forget, he is the bigger guy. So if he knows how to use his height, if he knows how to use his reach, if he has the skill to know how to use these physical attributes, that doesn't take away from the fact that he has those physical attributes. Because if he didn't, well, it would be a very different fight.
Wouldn't it?
And Mikey Garcia suddenly wouldn't be daring to be great, as they so eloquently put it. You know, that's the buzzword, that's the catchphrase. Mikey was daring to be great. But just what implies the daring? What implies the dare?
Errol's bigger.
What do people mean? What did they mean when they said that Mikey Garcia was daring to be great? Because that's all I could hear leading up to this fucking mismatch. That he was daring to be great. Now, I don't recall
Anyone saying that?
Anybody saying that Mikey was daring to be great when he fought either Dejan's Latijanine, or when he went up there to 140 pounds, fought Adrian Broner, or when he fought Sergey Lipinets, and when he subsequently dropped down and fought the much taller and much longer Robert Easter. I don't recall them saying that Mikey was daring to be great, whereas in the case of Errol Spence, that's what they were saying he was doing, that he was daring to be great. But what exactly implies the dare? Could it be that Mikey Garcia and the dare, that he is daring to be great? Could it be that what encompasses that dare is that he's fighting a guy that is so much bigger than he is in a weight class that he's never fought in? Also, you guys could turn around...
Say size don't matter.
...and act like size had nothing to do with the fight. That size had no role to play in this contest. Before the fight, you're telling me that Mikey's daring to be great because he's climbing up there to fight a much bigger man than himself. Also, you could turn around after the fight, after the mismatch, because it really wasn't a fight. Also, you could turn around and act like size didn't matter. Ladies and gentlemen, this is very poorly crafted, shoddy marketing, and it relies upon the gulliblest of the gullible, the most idiotic of the idiots. If you let them spoon-feed you this bullshit after trying to charge you for what I already told you was a mismatch, for what I already told you is a fight that doesn't need to be made, is a fight that doesn't make sense, is a fight where Mikey Garcia is biting off more than he can chew, and he just stepped in shit. And a better fight would have been the Mikey Garcia versus Vasyl Lomachenko fight, because at least they would have been on equal footing with each other. Whereas they stage this mismatch, attempt to charge you for it, try to convince you that it's not a mismatch so that you can buy it, only so that they can turn around and tell you that it was a mismatch, that he was outskilled, and size had nothing to do with it.
Well then, why was size your marketing angle of choice? Why was size and Mikey daring to be great by taking on a man that was so much bigger than him? Why was the whole David and Goliath shtick your marketing choice for this fight? I mean, you're telling me that it's supposed to be this great fight because it's a David and Goliath kind of matchup, and Mikey's daring to be great, so you can turn around and tell me that Errol's size had nothing to do with the fight, had nothing to do with the victory? Look, that's a load of horse shit. This is the reality. It's a two-pronged process. Errol Spence had the skill to effectively use his size, but that doesn't take away from the fact that he had the size for him to use. You can't use something that you don't have, you understand? And because you know how to use it doesn't change the fact that you have it, because if you didn't have it, it wouldn't be there for you to use it in the first place.
Against the little man.
Mikey Garcia spent a good portion of this fight on the defensive. Good portion of this fight just trying to hang in there, trying to survive. Why is that? Because he's facing a bigger puncher than himself, so he can't open up as much as he normally would if he were in there with a 135-pound fighter or a 140-pound fighter. He's taking shots from this guy on the arms, and it's enough to warrant a level of respect that he doesn't usually give guys in his prescribed weight class, because in his prescribed weight class, where he belongs, those hits don't have the same effect. But you're fighting a guy that is so much bigger than you are, and yes, he has his own skills. I mean, it would be dishonest to say that Errol Spence has no skill at all.
He's got skills.
So, it is a skilled fighter, but it's a skilled fighter that is so much bigger than you, and I said this in my prediction video. I said this leading up to the fight, and I'll leave the link to all those videos in the description box. I said this very clearly. This guy can hit you on the arms and hurt you. He doesn't have to land flush to get your respect, because this guy's so much bigger, packs so much more punch than anyone that you faced, that you're not going to want to open up on this guy. You're not even going to want to counter this guy, because he's hitting you with shots on the arms, on the gloves, and it feels like you're getting hit by a train. So of course you're going to go out there and just try to hang on, try to survive, and service as a walking punching bag. But a lot of the reason that that's happening is due to his size, is due to his punching power, is due to the physical advantages that he has over you. Not just the skills element of it, but the size. And it's very dishonest, it's very tactless of Richard Schaefer to think that people are so stupid that they're gonna forget that you build this thing as a David and Goliath kind of matchup, only so you could turn around post-fight and say that size had nothing to do with it. Well, size certainly had a lot to do with how you were selling this thing. The whole thing is kind of, undignified. Watching these guys praise Errol Spence for, handling a little man that we all knew didn't belong in the welterweight division from the moment that this fight was announced. I mean, I'm sure that there are some naive and gullible people out there who thought that Mikey could pull this off, but the vast majority of people knew that Mikey Garcia would be a fish out of water in the 147-pound division because he looked like he had hit his ceiling in the 140-pound division. And in spite of all of this, the people over there at the PBC, they choose to be intellectually dishonest about it. They choose to try to beat you over the head with a sledgehammer and convince you that this is somehow a big win for Errol Spence. That, oh my God, you know, this is like, oh wow, you know, you're like, wow. When all he really did was beat a little guy. I mean, we saw Vasyl Lomachenko beat a little guy, but Vasyl Lomachenko, unlike Errol Spence, managed to make the little guy quit. And yet Vasyl Lomachenko, unlike Errol Spence, said that he didn't deserve credit for the victory, that he doesn't consider it a big win because that wasn't the little guy's weight class.
Do you think this victory makes you the fighter of the year? No. No. 3 wins.
So what? Not 3 big wins.
Was he about as good as you expected, or not as good, or did you know it would go like this?
He's a good fighter. He's a strong fighter, but it's not his weight. It's not his size.
Do you think this victory makes you the fighter of the year?
No. No.
3 wins.
So what? Not 3 big wins.
Whereas Errol Spence thinks he's gonna be bigger than Mayweather, and he's pound for pound #1, and all this crazy shit, and it's like, dog, all you did was beat a guy that had no business in your weight class. Why on earth are you guys trying to blow that out of proportion?
You know, in all seriousness,
Where's the dignity? I mean, where's it gone? Where's the dignity? Where's the integrity? Where is the self-respect? At what point does this kind of mediocrity
this crap
pass for what is supposed to be the #1 pound-for-pound fighter for beating a guy who he's obviously bigger than? And we're just gonna try to ignore that because Richard Schaefer, like what? You know. It's not the first time Richard Schaefer tried to pour sugar on shit and serve it to the boxing community. I mean, this is the guy that said that the boxing community was clamoring for MIKEY Garcia versus Errol Spence as opposed to
Terrence Crawford.
Errol Spence versus Terrence Crawford. I guess that strap season is officially over, considering that Errol doesn't seem to be too concerned with straps these days, and we can't really say that it's man down, #man down, when you didn't actually get the man down, except that this man was so much smaller than you are that it's kind of peculiar that you didn't get the man down. But you know. Now, looking towards the future, Manny Pacquiao said that he's not intimidated and that Errol Spence doesn't hit that hard. That, you know, he's like Ladwaba. And that, he's looking to fight in July. He needs to speak to Al Heyman because he's looking to fight in July as to not affect his work as a member of the Senate in his home country. And Errol Spence says that he is open to July. But, you know, for both of these guys, there are other options on the table besides each other. I mean, I'm sure that Errol Spence probably has his heart set on a Pacquiao fight because of the name of Manny Pacquiao. But just as well, Shawn Porter is an option, and I'd have to say that if there were a fight out of those 2 fights, or just, you know, any of those guys over there on that side of the street, if there were any fight that I think Errol Spence actually needs to get the guys like me to lay off, to get the guys like me to say, okay, he did that, and I can get behind that. You understand? That is a credible argument. That is a more credible scalp than the one that you're being praised for today. I think that the fight that encompasses that the most
those 2
is a fight with Shawn Porter. More so than a Pacquiao fight. You know, Pacquiao doesn't have a full version of a world title, so that doesn't bring us any closer to an undisputed champion if Errol Spence were to face him, you know? I mean, it really doesn't bring us any closer to an undisputed champion. It just, you know, it's a formality. And, while Manny Pacquiao may be saying this now, I do recall that Freddie Roach himself said if they can't get a Mayweather rematch, then Thurman would be the next fight that they would like to have. So who knows? Who knows if Manny decides on Spence or Manny decides on Thurman? But I definitely feel that the ball is in Manny Pacquiao's court to make that kind of a decision. He's the veteran fighter, and let's face reality, he's the A-side. Out of all the welterweights they got on that side of the street, not a single one of them possesses the marquee value that he does. So ultimately, I feel like the final decision, as far as who's gonna fight who, rests with Manny. I'm sure Spence wants it. I'm sure Keith wants it. But I think the final decision rests with Manny Pacquiao. I'll say that if it came down to those 2 choices, if it came down to a Manny Pacquiao fight or a Shawn Porter fight, If it came down to those two choices and I had to pick which one I want to see based on personal preference, I'd pick the Sean Porter fight. I'd pick that fight because, well, that's a unification fight, and that's what we've been asking for. Consolidation within the weight classes. Limiting the number of guys running around calling themselves champions and waving belts and taking pictures with them. That's what we've been asking for the longest time. And the fact that these two guys have been on the same side of the street for as long as they've been on the same side of the street, that's a fight that's long overdue. You want people to believe in Errol Spence the way that they used to, because people didn't always have these opinions. I didn't always have these opinions about Errol Spence. I had high hopes for Errol Spence not that long ago, and we saw the shift. We saw how his talk and his behaviors were changing. You know, so that's really what inspired the criticism. But if they can get back to the best fighting the best, that if Sean Porter is the WBC champion and Errol Spence is the IBF champion, then that's the fight I want to see, because that's the fight that involves two world champions that can unify their titles, and only one victor can emerge with both. That's what I would rather see, to see Errol Spence test his mettle against a guy who's in his prime, against a guy, a young champion, like he's a young champion. Not against a guy who, yes, he has a big name, but we all know what stage in his career he's in, because that's more smoke and that's more mirrors. And I just watch you guys sell a showcase fight as some kind of big event. You know, the MIKEY Garcia fight, that was a showcase fight, man. That's what it was. It was a mismatch, is what it was. And I knew it was a mismatch from the beginning, but the PBC didn't want to tell you that. But that's what it was. That's what it always was. That's what it was always going to be. So what I want to see next from Errol Spence are the meat and potatoes that make up an elite level fighter's resume. The kind of meat and potatoes that people can look back on and say that, okay, this guy was fighting the best. Few lighter touches aside, he found the time to fight the best fighters, in his weight class. The kind of stuff that you really can't complain about. Because as it stands today, it appears that the most elite level fighter, the most high level guy on your entire welterweight resume in 25 professional contests isn't even a fucking welterweight. And he's barely a junior welterweight. I mean, when he fought you, he wasn't coming from there, was he? No, he was coming from 135. So the most elite level guy on your resume, the most formidable opponent that you have faced so far, Mr. Boogeyman, is a guy who came up from 135. You'll forgive me for saying that that's nothing to write home about. Those things in mind, I'd rather see a Sean Porter fight. And now that Sean Porter and his father, Kenny Porter, are acting like they want that fight, that's the avenue I want to see Errol Spence go. I want to see a unification fight.